Hello, my name's Gideon, and I spent 5 years researching the history of idioms for my book, which at the time of recording is not out yet, but it will be soon, so check out the description for more information. Today on LetThemTalkTV, we're on a quest to discover the oldest English idioms in the English language. Join me as we go back in time, not 10 years, not 100 years, but more than 1,000 years. And when I say English idioms, I mean ones that originated in England rather than those that come from ancient Rome or ancient Greece or the Old Testament, which is thousands of years old. But I'm afraid we won't find any in English that old. Do you know why? Because the English language didn't exist then. We can only talk about an English language from the mid-7th century. That's when you find the first piece of writing in Old English. Today's video is sponsored by Babbel. I want a fashionable hat. Ich möchte gern einen Hut nach neuesten Mode haben. I wish to hire a typewriter. Ich möchte eine Schreibmaschine mieten. This is no good. Are you still using that German phrase book from 1928? Yes. Why don't you try Babbel? It's one of the top language learning apps in the world. A little while later.
Guten Tag.
Guten Tag.
Was hätten Sie gerne?
Einen Kaffee bitte.
Klar, hier bitte.
Danke. Haben Sie einen schönen Tag.
Danke gleichfalls.
This is much better. I'm finally learning German. I can't wait to try this out in Vienna. Babbel is your personal language coach. You start having conversations in your target language from the first lesson. You can talk about travel, business, relationships, and much more. It's great if you're going on a trip, as I am, but if you want to step up and go deeper into the language, they have live lessons and podcasts. And there's a 20-day money-back guarantee. What language would you like to learn? Let me know below. To get up to 55% off your subscription, use the QR code here or find the link in the description. Thank you to Babbel for sponsoring this video. Anyway, to start off, I will give a few honourable mentions to old idioms in translation. Most idioms from ancient Greece and ancient Rome were translated into English during the Renaissance period or even later. For example, the works of Homer, who wrote in the 8th century BC, were not translated into English until about 1600. Ancient Greece gave us sour grapes, which comes from Aesop's fables written around 600 BC. Sour grapes is when you fail to achieve something, but you pretend you didn't want it in the first place. So, for example, I'm glad I didn't get that promotion. I don't want to work with those losers in head office. I'm much happier in the factory. Really? Sounds like sour grapes to me. However, it's only been an idiom in English since the mid-18th century. Ancient Rome gave us in vino veritas, in wine there is truth, which I know is Latin, but it's been used in England in its Latin form for centuries. It was coined by Pliny the Elder around 70 AD. Here's a quote from 1594, which I'll read in modern English. I perceive sober men tell most lies, for in vino veritas, if they had drunk wine, they would have told the truth. So men drink not only to find truth, but also to be truthful. Interesting. Side note here, the full quote is, in vino veritas, in aqua sanitas, in water there is health. Funny how some people conveniently overlook the second part. All that glitters is not gold is a phrase associated with William Shakespeare, although he said all that glisters is not gold in the Merchant of Venice. But however you say it, it dates back much further in English to 1220. In modern English, not everything that shines is gold. It is, though, a translation of a phrase in Latin, and it's likely based on Aesop again. And by the way, there is a theme that runs through this video. Just because Shakespeare wrote something doesn't mean that he was the first to use it. He used a great many expressions that were already known in his day, and as you'll see, the origins of many idioms are wrongly attributed to Shakespeare. They are in fact much older, and I talk more about that in my video on Shakespeare. You can check it out here. From the Bible. From the Old Testament, we get expressions like an eye for an eye or to extend an olive branch. The New Testament gave us to cast the first stone, the blind leading the blind. And although the Old and New Testaments were written a long time ago, most of the quotations we use today in English come from the King James Bible of 1611. Before that, the Bible was mainly studied in Latin. The few earlier English translations existed, but they were not widely read. However, during the Anglo-Saxon period, before 1066, snippets of the Bible were translated into Old English. Some idioms still in use today come from those early translations. So flesh and blood, meaning close family members, appears in a biblical translation from around the year 10,000. And, here we go, the origin of the phrase has been misattributed to Shakespeare, who used it in, once again, The Merchant of Venice. Thou art mine own flesh and blood. But no, it predates Shakespeare by several centuries. Here's a quote in its Old English form from approximately 990 AD. Flesh and blood did not reveal it to you. The apple of my eye, meaning the person closest and most dearest to you, you are the apple of my eye, dear viewer. Although the phrase appears in the King James Bible of 1611, you can trace the phrase back to King Alfred the Great, who, it is said, translated a Latin text in around 880 AD. The apple, by the way, in this phrase is not the crunchy fruit, but rather your pupil or even the entire eyeball, which used to be referred to as an apple. And here's the quote in modern English. Protect me, Lord, and save me, just as one protects the apples of his eyes. Also from Old English, you have give up the ghost, which in modern English means to finally stop working. For example, my Windows XP computer has finally given up the ghost. I guess it's time to upgrade. Now, it is found in the King James Bible, the expression, I mean, not Windows XP, where it means to die, to release your spirit, to release your soul to heaven. Man dieth and wasteth away. Ye man give up the ghost, and where is he? But the expression appears in Old English with the first written reference to it from the second half of the 9th century. So it's incredibly old. However, it's ultimately a translation of one of a number of Latin phrases. So far, we found very old expressions which have been used continuously in English for more than 1,000 years. But they are translations of biblical expressions from Hebrew or Latin or Greek. But what about English expressions that originated in England and are not translations? So we have to lie low. Now in modern English it means to keep out of sight, the sort of thing one gangster would say to another gangster. You're in the 10 most wanted list, you better grow a beard and lie low for a while. Okay. But it's him again. Shakespeare used it in Much Ado About Nothing with the current meaning in 1600. If he could write himself with quarrelling, some of us would lie low. Shakespeare was one of the first to use it with the modern meaning, but the expression is much older. The Oxford Dictionary gives this quote from 1275. You shall now lie in the earth very low. However, the meaning of the expression has shifted over time. In that Middle English period, it meant to be impoverished. So yes, we've been using it for almost 800 years, but not the way it used to be used. The expression scot-free, which means to get away with punishment even if you deserve it. He robbed the bank, but due to a legal technicality, he got off scot-free. The scot was a tax, and although scot-free has been used since the 12th century, it used to mean that you were exempt from paying the tax, the scot, and it's only been used with its current meaning since the 16th century. This search for a purely English idiom where the meaning hasn't changed is proving difficult, but let's continue our investigation. The next idiom, we know exactly where it comes from and when it comes from. It's from the Statute of Winchester of 1285, and it is hue and cry. This is an idiom with a fascinating history, and if you don't know hue and cry, it means in modern English to make a big fuss, an outcry, a kerfuffle. So, for example, when the president refused to release the files, there was a public hue and cry. Or when the bank robber got off scot-free, there was an enormous hue and cry. The police force is relatively recent, only dating from the 19th century. So how did you catch criminals before them? Well, the Statute of Winchester said if someone witnessed a crime, especially a theft or an assault, they were required by law to hue and cry. Hue comes from the French huer, to jeer, and cry from the French crier, to mean to shout out, like stop thief. So everyone who heard the hue and cry was legally required to join the chase, to try to catch the criminal. And if you didn't, then the entire community could be held responsible and fined. So it's kind of like a Good Samaritan law, I guess, and an interesting snapshot into how justice worked in the Middle Ages. So finally, we've got an idiom that is very old, and it originated in England. But one tiny weeny itsy bitsy problem though. Yes, it's English in the sense that it's from England, but the Statute of Winchester was written in French. Damn. From 1066 until the mid-14th century, all the laws in England were written either in French or Latin. The French of that period is called Anglo-Norman, and this Statute of Winchester was written in Anglo-Norman in the 13th century. But the Oxford English Dictionary gives the first usage in English in 1503. So 1503, the English version, that's still very old. But let's see if we can find something older. By the way, I just want to make a correction to an earlier video I made entitled 11 Common Idioms We've Been Using Since the Middle Ages. Now in that video, I mentioned the expression a baker's dozen, which means 13. At a time when the weight of bread was strictly controlled by law, bakers used to give 13 rolls instead of 12, just in case one of them was underweight, which could result in a fine. Now, while the expression baker's dozen is indeed from the Middle Ages, I said in that video that it was from the 13th century. After doing some research, I found out that the word dozen is from the 13th century. It comes from the French. But the specific phrase baker's dozen is first recorded in 1499. That's still the oldest yet, but we can, however, go back further. So here we have the top 2 English idioms born in English, in the English language, which are not translations, which have kept the same meaning throughout the centuries and have been in continuous use since their inception. Are you ready? In second place, we have dead as a doornail, which means completely and totally dead. So for example, are you sure your Windows XP computer is dead? Yeah, dead as a doornail. And this one has been wrongly attributed to our old friend Shakespeare. Come thou and thy 5 men, and if I do not leave you all as dead as a doornail, I pray God I may never eat grass more. But it's much older, much older. William Langland in Piers Plowman was written in about 1370, and this is how he used it. Faith without deeds is feebler than nothing and as dead as a doornail. And the phrase was also used a little bit earlier by an anonymous poet around 1350. So yeah, centuries before the bard used it.
I had an original story kicking around Paramount. My agent told me it was dead as a doornail. But I knew a big shot over there who'd always liked me.
And so, the number 1, the oldest expression in the English language, according to my research, is, drumroll please, haven't slept a wink. The idiom just means haven't slept at all. But forsooth, its origins have been wrongly attributed once again to Mr. Shakespeare. In fact, he used it twice. He uses it in Macbeth. I'll just give you that quote. Lady Macbeth says, I have not slept one wink, after the murder of King Duncan. But the expression had been in use at least 300 years before Shakespeare put quill to paper. The Oxford English Dictionary gives the earliest citation as 1303 from a work entitled Handling Sin by Robert Manning of Brunn. Ne meat ete, ne drank drinker, ne slept only a leppy wink, ate no food, drank no drink, and hardly slept a wink. So yeah, next time you're hit with a dose of insomnia, at least you can take consolation in the fact that you can use possibly the oldest English idiom, I couldn't sleep a wink. If that's the oldest idiom in the English language, then what's the newest? Now, I haven't made a video about that yet, but I have written about it in my newsletter, The Rambler, and if you want to read it and my future newsletters, then check the link in the description. It's free. That's all for now. Bye.